Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the CEO Journals podcast. Today on the show, you have the pleasure of listening to Purdeep Sangha. Purdeep, how are you doing today?
Hey, Ethan, I'm doing awesome, man. Thank you. I truly appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you today.
Awesome. No, the opportunity and the pleasure is all mine. You are the one who I am gaining all the knowledge from, and the listeners are ever so grateful for you diving on the show today. So, for the listeners that don't know who you are, give us a quick 60-second introduction of who you are and what you do, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Purdeep Sangha. You could say, widely known as the mentor for men in business, and I work with executives, business owners, entrepreneurs, mainly guys, and we'll talk about the reason why, but really guys in business who really want to take their business and their life to the next level. So the hashtag is hashtag men who win, and it's really helping men not only be better in business, but better in their relationship, better as fathers, just better in society and the community as a whole, because I have this massive passion in terms of where this world is headed and where men need to be from a leadership standpoint. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. You could say that I'm a business strategist mixed with the transformational side as well, because that's a big part of my background in terms of helping a man go from where he is to where he wants to be personally, inside, individually, as a person.
Awesome. And I can't wait to dive into all of that more. Something I really find interesting, I ask all my guests, is actually with regards to relationships and how to build and keep relationships. That's definitely something I want to talk about, as I find that a really interesting topic that I don't actually think is spoken about enough in today's
Mhm.
age, especially in the business world.
Exactly.
But the way I like to start all my episodes is by throwing it back with my guests and asking them about their upbringing and their time at school. So let's focus on a 14, 15-year-old version of yourself. How did you find school? Were you one of these straight A students that could go into the lesson, do no work, ace every class? Or were you the class clown sitting at the back who didn't pay much attention?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was kind of pegged off as the guy that sat in the back that really didn't know much. If the teacher didn't know much, I would have my hat backwards. I would have my hair, or sort of my chair kind of tilted back. If you're watching this, if you can see this, you can see that I don't have hair, so it's not hair. It's my chair that was tilted back, and I would just kind of sit there and observe and see what's happening in the classroom. So academically, I come from an immigrant family here in Canada. My parents immigrated from India in the early 70s, and I grew up on an orchard. So I grew up in a very mindful environment, but a very, you could say, physically tough working environment. I started my first job when I was 9 years old. And when other kids had summers, I would be out there on the orchard at 4:30 in the morning, working till sometimes 6 or 7 at night. So that work ethic is really what groomed me. And so my parents said to me, Pradeep, we don't want you to have to suffer like we did. We want you to have an education. And it just so happens that I was really good from an academic standpoint. I had some really good mentors throughout school. I was a quiet kid that was pretty much a straight A student, you can say, because I just had this knack for studying. And at that time, which is really interesting, I had this real desire and this curiosity about how the brain worked and how people work and how does one kid outperform another kid. Excuse me. And I actually started to study neuroscience at that time. That's when it was actually before it became a big trend in terms of how does memory work, how does speed reading work, how do you actually learn. And so I started learning those techniques at that time. And it was actually very interesting because I had a photographic memory. I was able to memorize a 400-page textbook, for example, word for word, illustration by illustration, by the time I was in university. And so that definitely helped me in that age. But more importantly, Ethan, you can say that I was kind of the black sheep as well, because my parents wanted me to go into academics and be a doctor. That's what they wanted me to be, but it wasn't for me. And I was kind of doing it for them as I kind of grew up. And I just didn't feel, how you could say, I just didn't feel like I was really following the path that I wanted to follow. I was struggling from that perspective because I always kind of had this wild side in me as well. And I had a passion for helping people, but it all played out in the end. You can say this journey that I went through in terms of the academic world and the corporate world was really, all these pain points and all these challenges really grew me to who I was. the Here's my message. Being in school, I learned a lot more out of school about how to be successful in life than I actually did inside school. Like, school is great, and I'm always supporting people getting an education. The thing for me is what it taught me was work ethic, right? How do you really put time in to actually excel, because if you're not on top of stuff in school and you kind of fall short, that's kind of how you may live life as well. And so it's an important life lesson for us to learn. But that's kind of how I was known as a geek. People used to call me Beep. The Nick. Here's a tune that they used to say, "Beep beep Purdeep the geek." That's what they used to call me. And so I kind of grew up that way. And I kind of, I was, you could say at times I was kind of like, I don't like this life. I don't like being the geek. But now that I look back on it, there's so many things that I learned throughout my school ages that I'm applying today. And I see a lot of the other people that haven't really excelled in life. And I kind of say, well, it was worth it.
For sure. And
Yeah.
you say that your parents obviously wanted you to do the classic route of becoming a doctor, but were they always supportive in what you actually did when in the end you said, no, that is not the route I want to go down? Did they then support you in what you said you wanted to do?
No.
No.
Yeah, short answer, no, because I got into the corporate world, you can say, and I kind of worked my way up. It wasn't until I was an executive that they were actually truly happy when I had that. Status is a big part, and I think it's a big part of not only from an immigrant family, but also just an Indian family, especially, is the status is a big thing. So it wasn't until I was an executive that they really said, okay, he's actually made something of himself. Interesting enough, though, when I left the corporate world, it was almost like I started from scratch again, because they looked at me and they said, "Are you crazy? Are you
Mm.
nuts? What did you do? You just threw your entire life away." And so they, that's how parents are, I guess, right? They look at you, they want the best for you, but sometimes they don't understand how we are, right? Our true needs.
So I'm assuming you completed college then. So you did school, went to university, got your degree, and then you went into the corporate world. Why did you then decide to come out of the corporate world then? If you're sitting in this executive job, you're safe, you've got a constant income, you know that being at this level you can still do extremely well for yourself. Why did you then decide, no, I want to go off on my own? Because that must have been quite scary, knowing that you're giving up
Yeah.
this comfortable position of being an executive. Because a lot of people look at that as their end goal of
Yeah.
being that executive. That's what they work towards. But the fact that you've got there and then gone, not for me.
Yeah.
I want to do something else. How was that, and
Well,
why did you do that?
yeah, it was really tough. Let's just say I worked my way up to being an executive, and my goal was to be a CEO of a major corporation. That was my goal, and I was well on my way. And I had worked throughout. We're talking about large organizations too. That I worked and I led marketing divisions, sales operations divisions, project management. So my goal was to get a knowledge of every single division in a business, so I could be that, you could say, that optimum CEO. And I
Yeah,
was well on that path. And so I had a great career. I had a great salary. I had it made on paper, right? I was traveling the world. I had box tickets to sporting events. I could entertain and budget. All that kind of stuff was paid for, but I wasn't happy inside. That was the biggest thing. I was just living a life that I felt like other people wanted me to live. I was I was going to work. I was kind of playing out the motions, you could say, just day in and day out, doing the same old thing. Felt like I was on autopilot. And so my relationship was suffering too. My relationship with my wife was having challenges, and I just really needed to feel like I was, you could say, following my own path, creating my own life, and actually doing something like, because I'm a firm believer we live this life once, right? And that we may believe in reincarnation or maybe coming back in a different, whatever it is, but this form, whoever we are as a people, as an individual, that's only going to happen once. And so might as well live it out to the fullest, the way you want to live it out to. So I made that decision. I told my wife, and she said, are you sure about this? This is a big decision. This is going to change everything, right? I said, yeah. And so I just walked into work one day and I quit. I literally just quit, and everybody looked at me. My colleagues looked at me and they said, "Are you okay? Like, what happened?" A lot of people thought I got fired, because as soon as I quit, they kind of walked me out the same day. And so everybody thought, like, what did Pradeep do that got him fired? What's going on here? So it was a really challenging time, especially after I left, because the first thing that I said to myself was, "Oh crap, what do I do now?"
so you
You
had
know,
no plan.
no,
No
I
plan.
really didn't have a plan.
So literally, you went from great salary to what the hell do I do now?
Yeah, yeah. And it was interesting because at that time, though, I was also coaching entrepreneurs on the side, kind of. So my passion is helping people. My people's passion is really giving or sharing the knowledge and the tools and skills and systems that I have to anybody that can use it. And at that time, it was entrepreneurs, business owners, because a lot of business owners don't know how to run business. They have a passion or they have a specific skill, but they don't know how to run a business. They don't know the ins and outs and the nuances of what it takes to actually grow a business successfully. And so I was just helping people on the side. And I said, you know what, there's a big need here. There's a big gap. And then it kind of it went from there.
So when did you realize that you wanted to be the mentor for men in business? Where did that come from? Or was that your first venture, or was there anything before that?
No, there was before that. I was doing, you could say, business coaching in general. I played around in a number of areas, executive teams, for example, which I still do. But I was coaching from a business growth perspective at first, and now I'm actually doing a kind of you could say, a dual role, but even more on the transformational side. I realized that uh, in terms of men specifically, because I have a passion for helping men, I've seen what it's like to have a strong father figure, a strong masculine force in the house. My grandfather was in the British Indian Army. My dad was an ex-police officer in India, for example. So I saw the strength that they brought to being a strong man in a family. And I don't see that these days anymore. I very seldom do I see strong men. And what that does is that it helps children grow, and it helps them actually grow in a very safe environment. And so that's always been a passion of mine. I also have seen the struggles that my dad faced. For example, he was an entrepreneur, but he just wasn't fulfilled in life, and he suffered from alcoholism. And so for years, I saw him struggle. And I always think to myself, what if he had a mentor that had the knowledge that I had, or the skills that I had? What would his life have been like? Because last year, my father passed away at 64 and a half, and his goal, his milestone was to hit 65, because that was a point for him to say that I did it, right? That I did the business, I raised a happy, successful family, but unfortunately, he didn't get to that point. He was 6 months away, and so he suffered a heart attack, and he was meant to go, and it was a struggle for our family. It was a big hit because they kind of threw everything up in the air. But that's what gets me going in terms of working with men specifically. There's a lot of stats I can share, Ethan, that I know.
Go for
Especially,
it.
I'm going to talk about North America, especially in the U.S. 52% of kids in the U.S. are being raised without full-time fathers. The levels of testosterone in men have dropped. The anxiety rates, depression rates, suicide rates for men have skyrocketed. And so men are in a really tough spot these days. And especially when we talk and we take a look at, it's big in the US, take a look at the Me Too movement and the concept of toxic masculinity, which I understand the Me Too movement had to happen because there's a lot of stuff that men were doing that wasn't right. And it was really holding women down and actually abusing women. But what that's also done now on the flip side is actually caused men to really be afraid of being men. And so a lot of men are questioning themselves in terms of even in executive roles or even as men in society, what does it mean to be a man these days? Because am I being too controlling? Am I too masculine, or am I not masculine enough? And that's impacting their roles and relationships, because now we have women that feel like they have more masculine force than men. And so interesting enough, half my referrals are from women saying, please help my man. And so, yeah, it's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
And so we have that, and now we have this. It feels like this next generation is there's so much up in the air when it comes to technology as well, and how that's impacting how people are being raised. Family units are degrading, for example. Family dinners are going away. So all these things are impacting how kids are being raised, and that's ultimately my passion, because I truly believe that when you have a successful man in a business and in a relationship and is a healthy father, that society wins as a whole, right? We raise happier and healthier children that contribute to society, instead of having these mass, you can say, the bullying that's happening, the shootings that are happening in North America, for example, the racism that's happening. All of this stuff is a stem. And a big component of it is that men are not stepping up in the roles that they need to. So that's kind of my mission, you can say, the movement that I created. But from a business perspective, bottom line is that helping men specifically in business is a niche because it's very underserved. And there's tons of female entrepreneur groups, but there's very few men entrepreneurial groups.
No, I agree. And I find it really interesting. So, something I want to ask you then is the phrase where people just say, especially if men, you're told to man up. Man up is thrown around here, there, and everywhere. But surely, and as you say, the suicide rates in men are rising. And
Yes.
the fact that you're being told to man up, men feel as if they can't express their feelings because that would not be considered manly. So if you were told to man up, what would your reaction be to the person telling you to do so?
See, here's the interesting thing. That word is being thrown around, and to a degree, and this is where it gets we get on the polar sides. I agree with that term in certain aspects, but it's people that do not understand what it means that are throwing it around. That's the problem, because manning up doesn't mean that, hey, look, just put your feelings aside. It actually means embracing your feelings.
Yeah.
And there's moments when you do need to man up. There are moments, and I get women telling me this all the time, that their men need to man up because they're feeling like they're being more manly than their men. But that doesn't mean that, hey, look, guys, and here's the challenge with guys. We've been raised a lot of times to be just push through it, right? Be persistent and blast through our challenges, which we need to do. That's part of being a man. But there's a point in time where we say, I need help, or I'm not getting this, or I'm not getting the results. And men, unfortunately, a lot of times will rather burn out than ask for help. And so the movement that I've created for that is really helping men not only just step up as men, but actually understand their emotions better. And not necessarily be more emotional, but understand how their emotions work. So they say, at this time, maybe I just need to kind of chill out. Maybe at this time, I need to be more understanding. Maybe I need to connect with my spouse or my kids a little bit more, connect with myself a little bit more. I don't need to be super strong at this moment, because there's times, and very seldom, and I said this to my wife the other day, and this probably happens twice a year at the max. I say to my wife, and I say, you know what, I just need you to take care of me for this day, because I got so much on my plate, and this is the day, and I don't normally say it, but I just want to be taken care of today. I just need to recharge. And so there's times when we need to do that as guys.
Definitely. And I like how you've picked that from both sides and you're allowed to see it from both angles. And as you say, men should be allowed to see it from both angles as well. They shouldn't see it dead on what it means for. They should actually, as you say, understand it rather than think it's one thing and not the
Yeah.
other. So apart from being male, what are your typical clients like?
Oh, so they're basically, you could say, the business owner that wants more. The typical thing is, the most important thing they're looking for is freedom, because they're knee deep in their business and they want to grow their business and they want to have the freedom to do what they want when they want. That's a core value of mine in terms of what I teach for my clients, because that's why a lot of people are in business, because they want the freedom and the time to be able to enjoy the money that they're making. So the clients, they range. They could be veterinarians to dentists to people that own trucking companies to coaches to, you name it, all sorts of different types of people from different industries. But what they're looking for is, they're just looking for more, and they know that they can do more. They know that they have more inside of them that they're able to accomplish and achieve. I think that's the most common thing, is that inside they know that they could do more. They just want someone to not only believe in them, but give them the tools and knowledge and the skills to actually unlock it. Because I'm a firm believer, and this is where the neuroscience and the psychology and the mindfulness comes in, and there's a big component of spirituality that I use as well, that every person, not just a man, but every woman out there, every has a powerful force inside them. And when you align yourself with that force, when you align yourself internally, pretty much the sky's the limit. You can accomplish anything that you want. And how do I know this? Because I've experienced myself. I've taught other people how to tap into it. And I'm sure that you out there, Ethan, and the listeners out there, you've experienced this. Think of a time where you just felt like you were on top of the world. Like any challenge that was coming your way, you said, bring it on. That you felt like you can totally overcome it, and you could feel your body physically just have that energy. You have that vibration in your body where you're just like, I got this. It doesn't matter. You know what? Something can come out of the blue and sideswipe me right now. I got it. That's
Def-
what we're talking about.
I love that. So someone comes to you, your client, for example, where do you start? What are, without giving away too much, obviously,
Yeah.
because it's what you do.
No, I
What
don't
are
mind giving it away. Yeah.
what are some of the processes you go through with these people to make them get to that point of being able to say, "Bring it on! I can literally take on anything." How do you start? How do you take them from start to finish?
Yeah, the first thing is I take a look at what they want and what they truly want, because what people think they want is not necessarily what they always want. So understanding what that person is looking for. So a lot of people come to me and say, I want to grow my business. I want to make X amount of money. I want to triple my income, whatever it is. That's great. So then I ask them, what is behind that? Tell me what emotions you want to feel when you get to that goal. And why is that important? Because if you're working your butt off for 3 years and you're growing your business, you're making X amount of money, but you don't feel those emotions, it's a waste. What's the point of doing it? So tell me how you want to feel. So I asked them to point out the top 3 to 5 emotions that they want to feel, whether that's joy, inner peace, maybe that's excitement, maybe it's whatever it is, love that they want to feel. That's important to outline. That should be your goal. That should be your North Star in life. And then work backwards and say, what kind of lifestyle will support that? And what kind of business or career will support that lifestyle? Most people do it backwards. They focus on the money and they focus on the lifestyle without even focusing on the emotions. You have to understand that emotions drive everything that we do today. You as a person, you do things. You don't say, I think hunger, you feel hunger. You don't say you think love, you feel love. So you work, and this is based on neuroscience. Everything you're doing is based on an emotion and based on a feeling that you want to satisfy consciously and subconsciously. So if you're not working off emotions, then you're actually, excuse me, working against yourself. And so focusing on those emotions is critical. So how I do that is really getting them into that state of, okay, what would your life look like? Working backwards. Then we talk about what's holding them back, because it's what I call just releasing or removing the roadblocks. Because every person has at least 3 roadblocks. We're talking about big roadblocks that are stopping them. And when you can remove those roadblocks, then everything else sometimes falls into place. It just starts to, it's like blowing up a dam. When you blow up a dam, that water just starts to flow, right? And it just starts to flow and it'll clear up all the little dams down the river because there's just so much force and so much water coming down that dam. And so it's important to find out what the biggest roadblocks are. And so for people, I ask them, and I get down to the root cause. So I'm really good at identifying what the root cause is for people, because what people think is the root cause is never the root cause. So I get in there, and a lot of the times this is subconscious. This is where the transformational work comes in rather than the business strategies and tactics, because I go in there and I pull out things like, what are their core beliefs, their identity, who they think they are, their filters in terms of how they're perceiving the world, and then ultimately the stories that they're telling themselves. Because Ethan, you, I, everybody that's listening here, you are operating on stories. You are telling yourself a story every single minute, every single second. And 5 to 10% of that story is actually factual. Everything else is made up. And everything else is made up based on your life experiences, the beliefs that you have, what other people have told you. That's what your stories are based off. So a lot of people will tell themselves self-defeating stories, what I call disempowering stories. And so, and I'll give you a prime example. When I came out of the corporate world, one of my stories, and I knew this stuff, but I wasn't practicing it on myself at that time because I was just going through a lull phase in my life, that I said, who am I? Like, I'm next to nothing now, because I was seeing guys like Grant Cardone, Gary Vee, these big players out there, and I was saying, wow, look at their profiles. Look at how many people they're influencing. I'm next to nothing. What am I going to do? And that was my story. That was my story for probably a good month or two. And I just basically said, how am I going to do this? I'm nowhere near these guys' caliber, whatever that is. And here's what I did. I said, I know this stuff. What am I doing? What story am I telling myself? And so all I did was tell myself a better story. And so I told myself, A, I'm the best at what I do, because I truly believe that from a neuroscience leadership psychology standpoint. B, people need my help out there. And C, I'm the guy to deliver it. So I created empowering stories for myself. Nothing factually changed. I was the exact same guy with the exact same skills, but my story completely changed. And what did that do? That changed how I operate. That changed how I made decisions. So if you take a look at the model, Ethan, is the model for success, because I've spent 2 decades studying some of the best people around the world. I've coached some of the best people in their industries. Is there's a model for success. The bottom foundation is what I call the self-mastery skills. On top of that, we can get into that in a little bit, but on top of that is your stories. Your stories determine your decisions. Every single decision you're making is based on the stories you tell yourself. And that on top of on your decisions are your actions. So life is simply this. It's a series of 2 things: the decisions you make and the actions you take. That's all it is. And you're constantly making decisions and you're constantly taking action. The better you are at making decisions and taking effective action, the more likely you're going to hit the top of the pyramid, which is the outcomes that you want out of life. And so ultimately, you have to have strong stories. You have to have empowering stories to make better decisions in life. The reason why people don't get ahead in life is because they're telling themselves the wrong stories and then not making effective decisions and taking effective action. So just by changing the stories you tell yourself, you can actually make better decisions and take more effective action.
For sure, and absolutely smash that. I can't like that is literally spot on to a T, because when you start as well, you always personally, as me as well, I'm looking at all of these. I think Instagram's a massive detriment to this as well, but you can choose who you want to follow on Instagram. That's down to
Yeah.
you. But and that factor aside, you're seeing all these people that have reached that success point, and it's difficult to put yourself in a position where you then make yourself believe, because you're seeing these people that have already made it and you think, I want to be like them. But when you should be developing yourself and making you that person rather than wanting to just consistently looking at others. So
Yeah.
how important do you think it is then to not get caught up in the numbers? Because especially for me, say, for example, with a podcast, I can see how many listeners I'm getting every single episode and how that's progressing. And hypothetically speaking, it could be small, could be low, could be high. But how important is it for me to not get caught up in the numbers?
Well, it's important not to get caught up in a negative way. So I'm a firm believer when it comes to business and success, you got to measure things. But it's those moments when you get down on yourself, that's the challenge. And so you have an option. You can either tell yourself empowering stories or disempowering stories. You can actually say, hey, look, the numbers aren't going to change, right? They're the same. But what you can tell yourself is, oh, this is a learning experience. This is a learning opportunity for me, because if my numbers aren't growing, it's for a reason. That means I have to do something different. That's all it is. So it's all in how you look at the numbers. Numbers are good, but don't, and that's the thing, you have to program your brain. And an easy way to understand this, Ethan, is that every time you think a negative thought, it reinforces a negative thought. And so what you need to do is, that's same as addictions. The reason why people are addicted is because when they start doing something once, it actually hardwires the brain cells together, and it makes it easier to do the same thing over and over again. Same goes for thinking. If you have a negative thought, crush it right away. Don't even let it enter your brain. Don't even, and some people think, well, that's just being naive. No, it's not. It's being smart. Because if you have a negative thought, if you have it once, okay. If you have a second time, just remember, each time you have that negative thought, you're clearing a path and a bigger path for those same negative thoughts to come through. So if you want to stop that pattern, really stop it. And that's, I have these moments too. I'll give you an example. In the evening, I'm pretty not wiped out, but you can say I'm lower in energy. And I never think about work after a certain period of time. After 7 o'clock, typically, I'm not thinking about anything extensive. I might answer an email if it's urgent, or maybe I feel like it. But I don't think of anything extensive, because why? I know my energy levels are low. And when my energy levels are low, there's two systems of thinking in your brain. I'm not accessing the higher level of thinking. I'm just accessing the fearful level of thinking, the rudimentary level of thinking. And every time I do that, I just have bad thoughts. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I don't even think about it. I just stop myself. The moment I start saying, hey, look, I need to think about work, I say, Purdeep, stop right there. And I should do something different. Spend time with my family, read a book, do something productive. Because, this is a long-winded answer to your question, but it's not the numbers, it's how you're looking at the numbers.
Definitely. And the way I look at it, I don't look at the numbers. I was just throwing that out there for people that
Yeah.
do. But I look at it as every single episode, I get to talk to some incredible business owner, entrepreneur I'm basically getting free lessons that they charge other people for.
Yeah.
I get to sit on a call with an expert for an hour and ask any question I want. Like, the world is my oyster. I can literally ask you any question I want to learn whatever I want, and
Yeah.
I
That's
can do
awesome.
that pretty much every day of the week. And that's why I did this podcast. I didn't do it for the numbers. My network has grown dramatically, and I've only interviewed you'll be my 13th episode.
Awesome.
But
Wow.
I've had the book opened to so many opportunities already, and I can't thank, well, one, myself enough for actually putting myself out there to do it, but those that have given me the opportunity to actually talk to them. So again, I thank you for that as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
So sort of full circle then, relating to, you're seeing these people like, as you say, Gary Vee, Grant Cardone, who are at the top of their game. We only see on Instagram their highlights. I know they talk about where they came from and whatever, but on their Instagram, they, like Grant Cardone, for example, is just posting pictures of his private jet, all his cars, whatnot. we don't see their come up, where they actually came from, and some of the worst days they've had in business. So I want to ask you, what has been the toughest day? If you could pick out a day that stood out most for you, what is the toughest day you've had in your journey so far?
Oh, wow. Well, I could say the toughest day in my journey from business was probably the day that my dad passed, because I just said, all this, I'm working my butt off here, but at the end of the day, I'm going to be gone, or someone in my life is going to be gone. So that's really when I sat down and said, is everything that I'm doing worth it? And that's really when I questioned it, because I was spending a lot of time away from my kids. I was spending a lot of time away from my kids at that time because I was on a mission to help men. But I was really wondering, like, am I really having the impact that I want to have? Because there's times when literally I do. I look at the numbers and I say, I've been working at this for so long, it's just not moving. And although I know this stuff, there's times when I just don't apply it myself. And it's just those moments that I catch myself in a low energy state. And I'm like, man, what am I going to do? There's times in my life where coming out, I had an executive salary, for example, and then I didn't have that salary anymore. And so I was just like, what the heck? And I had and I can say this is the biggest thing for me. I think the biggest challenge I've had is when people looked at me. I went from an executive, and I was kind of starting from scratch, and I felt like nobody. There's people in my own circle, my own family members, my people in my in-laws circle that were saying, what are you doing now? Are you a stay-at-home dad? Like, you're supposed to be contributing to your family. That was tough for me to swallow, right? And so that those were the toughest days, you can say. When my dad passed, it really put things in perspective. I said, is it worth it? Because I could go get a job maybe locally here and make a half a decent living, and maybe have a lot less headaches and spend more time with my family. And so should I choose that path? And I'm glad I chose the path that I continue to do today. But there's moments that we second guess ourselves. I think the most important thing is just really allowing those moments to happen, Ethan, because we all have those days. There's days I even still, things are going great, but there's times when I wake up and I'm not making the progress that I'm making. And so I question, do I just continue to push? And there's times when I've had serious conversations with my wife that I said, maybe this isn't for me anymore. Maybe there's someone better out there. Maybe I second guess myself. But those are short-lived moments, because you just got to keep pushing, right? But just like anybody else, like I look at Gary Vee and I look at Grant Cardone, I don't look at those guys anymore. I don't compare myself. I don't look at them, because I also know that a lot of these people are facing the same challenge. I know, because I know people in the circle of friends. I know people that have big influences, and I've talked to them and I've worked with them, and I see the challenges that they go through and I've gone through. A lot of people, the biggest thing I can say is, although it looks great to have the money, to have that life and all that kind of stuff, it's at a sacrifice. There's a sacrifice in some way, shape, or form. And we just don't know what it is. For me, that sacrifice was spending time with my family. And that's something I had to rein back and say, I'm going to do things differently. I'm glad I did, because those moments, I think, to clarify our journey in life.
So this is a question I normally ask at the end of the episode to all of my guests, but I'm going to ask it now because it's very on topic. So what advice would you give to those business owners, entrepreneurs, whoever, even if you've got a full-time job that is extremely demanding and you're spending a hell of a lot of your time doing it, what advice would you give to those individuals in order to help them maintain the relationships, whether that be with family, children, loved ones, friends, whoever? How would you encourage them and give them advice on how to keep these relationships and maintain them and make sure they do flourish and they don't get passed off and they don't lose that opportunity to spend that time? Because you've said you've experienced it, so you're going to speak from experience here, which is fantastic. So
Yeah.
give us the advice.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think, and I'm speaking from my own personal experiences, is that a lot of the times I thought that working my butt off was going to give me more freedom at the end of the day, and taking time away from my personal joys, taking time away from my family, because I didn't visit my family as much as I should have during those years that I was building the business. And I thought I was doing it as a good sacrifice. This is what it means to be an entrepreneur. But you have to understand that all of that, there's two things, or the most important thing to understand is that time is not your most important asset. It's actually your energy. And because you can have a spare hour, but if you don't have the effective energy to actually utilize it, you're not going to get what you want out of that hour. And so this was tough for me to learn. So the most important thing is remember what energizes you in life, because that energy, doing things for yourself, is not selfish. It's actually stuff, it's, you need that to actually give back. So think of it this way: if you don't recharge a battery, how's a battery going to actually power something? And we as human beings are human batteries. We consume energy and we expel energy. And so building a business, building a career requires energy. And if we're not taking that energy in, if we're not spending time with the people that we love, if we're not spending time doing the things that we love doing, we're not recharging ourselves. And that's actually taking away from our progress. So those moments where you say, hey, look, maybe I should just spend this weekend working, really take a look and say, are you really going to get what you want out of that entire weekend? Or do you need to recharge and maybe work that much harder next week? So taking that time out to recharge is the most important thing, because I see people burn out all the time. I've seen myself, there's moments when mentally I wasn't burnt out, but physically I was having physical ailments that I was starting to burn out. It was a sign. And the last thing that you want as a human being, as a person, is to burn out, because it's tough to come back from a state of burnout. So most important thing, you want to keep it on a positive note, is really keep your energy levels high. And to do that, do the things that you love doing, because the higher your energy, the more people will be attracted to you, the more you're actually going to get done, and the faster you actually get your outcomes.
Do what you love doing.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree with that one more. And I love that. And I can't thank you enough for all the value you've dropped in this episode so far. But I do want to ask those 3 questions on the 3 topics that I don't think are discussed enough. I do
Yeah.
this with all my guests. We've already done relationships, and
Yep.
you absolutely nailed that. And I can't, and obviously your father's passed recently, so I can't appreciate enough the fact you actually went into that, because that still must be quite touching with you. So I'm very, very humbled by what you've said, and thank you for doing so. But the other
Mhm.
2 are money and death. The question in relation to money, I don't think relates directly, but others do.
Yep.
But the question is, what does the word success mean to you?
Oh, success for me is literally, I equate it to freedom. It's really being able to do what I want when I want, and having, basically living a life of 3 emotions, really: love, joy, and peace. That is what success means to me. Is if I can be in those emotional states, I can't be in those emotional states all the time, but if I can be in those emotional states more often than not, that's what it means to be successful to me.
Perfect. And I think they're great, great objectives to have as well, because your job must also be extremely humbling. The fact that you're taking these individuals to a place of that, what you consider success as well, that's what you're teaching other people to do. So not only are you doing that yourself, you're doing it for others. That must be very humbling for you to do, and must be, as a job, that must be so driving to wake up every morning thinking I'm making a difference to people's lives.
Yeah, I think it's truly my passion. I was a personal trainer at 17, so I've always been into helping people transform and do things differently. And so that is what gets me going. Sometimes I get myself into trouble because I help a lot of people for free. I set aside so many hours a week, and I'll just kind of help people and help them through their business and through their life for free. But that is my passion, because those moments when I know that someone has actually, I could see it in their face, that moment, that they actually have an aha moment, and they're actually going to do something different that's actually going to change their life forever, and maybe even change the people around them forever. That is what drives me, because man, there's so much happening in this world today that I believe that just a little bit of work, just a little bit of transformation, just has a ripple effect throughout society.
God, everything on the news is so depressing at the moment as well. So you
Yeah,
turn it on, and as you said, there's no happiness. That's what we need, and we need people to actually just feel good about themselves. It's not difficult at the end of the day. It's not difficult, but we're constantly bombarded with this depressing information left, right, and center. So I
exactly.
salute you for doing what you do. So my final question for you, the final
Yep.
question of today's episode is: are you afraid of dying?
Yes. There's times when I am and times when I'm not. And so again, I'm a very spiritual person. I meditate a lot. My grandfather used to say this, is that if there was no death, people would not appreciate their lives, because death is a reminder to us, or for us, to really appreciate the moments that we have today. these moments that we have with our special loved ones. The biggest I can say, a lot of times I sit here and I say, you know what, I'm not afraid of death, and I'm not truly. And then there's times when I am, because I look at my kids and I say, I don't want to leave my kids. I don't want to leave my kids. I don't want to leave them without a father, or God forbid I lose them. Like those are the moments that I have a tough time with, because my kids, my wife, my family, they mean everything to me. And so, yeah, there are times when I'm afraid. And there's times when I'm more afraid than not. Sometimes when I watch the news and I see what happens, and I'm just see child abductions and stuff like that, I'm just like, oh crap, like what the heck's going on? And Ethan, I'm even afraid for the next generation. I'll be completely honest, because I don't know how the next generation is going to grow up in terms of my kids, because there's so much influence. I see technology having a positive influence, but I see more kids with anxiety at a younger age. There's stats to show that. And so I'm wondering, like, if I'm not around, who's going to teach my kids this stuff? So yeah, I can say I'm definitely afraid at times.
Perfect. And you're actually the first person to say that they are afraid of dying.
Oh
First
wow.
per Yeah, which has surprised me, because I don't know what I'd say if someone asked me that. I am, but as you say, I'm also not. I it's an inconvenience. Like as you say, I don't want to leave my family behind. Like this that whole it's just such a big question, and that's why I love answering it, because I get and that's the first time someone's gone down the route you've said as well, that the fact they don't want to leave family behind and just things like that. So again,
Yeah.
incredible answer, and thank you. You have
Yeah,
dropped
thank you.
You've dropped some incredible value on today's episode, so I can't thank you enough for your time and joining me on this episode of CEO Journals. So where can the listeners follow up with you, whether they want to be taught by they want your service, or whether they just want to simply ask you a question? Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can always go to my website, which is purdeepsangha.com, or you can find me in pretty much Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook at Purdeep Sangha. So I'm more than accessible. Feel free to reach out. You can friend me. You can ask me a question, and I'll respond personally, because I like to have that personal interaction and conversation. So any of those channels.
Perfect. And they will be in the show notes below, so don't worry about remembering those. Simply look below and they'll be there. Pradeep, once again, thank you for your time, and I hope everyone enjoyed this episode of CEO Journals.
Thanks again. I appreciate it.